Now, according to Ernst Young 2013 Attractiveness Survey, the highest proportion of respondents already doing business on the continent listed improving transport and logistics infrastructure in their top two constraints to business operations. These constraints continue to hinder the significant economic growth which is forecast to take place on the continent over the next few years. For more, I'm joined by Mike Fanuki, Executive in Business Development at Barloworld Logistics. Mike, thank you so much for making the time to join us. Now, I picked up a really crazy statistic the other day that if you want to fly from Senegal to Nigeria, you actually have to catch a flight that goes via Paris. And I think what it did for me is that it really just gave me an indication of how immature, if I may use that word, our transport logistics infrastructures. Now, sitting at Barloworld with a business that looks at moving goods around for business purposes, what are your views and your sentiments about where we are as a country and as a continent when it comes to our state of infrastructure around transport and logistics?
I think, yeah, the two separate issues, I think, is if we look at South Africa, Nosipho, is the issue is the infrastructure is pretty good. You know, a lot of people will complain about that we're not doing enough on rail, and there's always a drive to move from road to rail. But if you look at the issues in Africa, is in the arguments that you've just given around Senegal to Paris back to Nigeria, is that often you see the transportation channels being sort of direct lines from the ports to some sort of resource deep in the country, and they don't. These transportation channels don't cross the countries often in Africa, and it really makes it difficult to move goods around the continent and makes logistics expensive and inefficient.
Before we get to the cost, Mike, let me look at this commodity-dependent infrastructure that you're speaking about now. Africa is really on the cusp of almost a second upsurge of economic activity, and a lot of it is still pegged around mineral resources. Do you think that we're going to, or does it seem as if we're approaching the infrastructure conversation differently this time around? Are we seeing infrastructure that seeks to integrate people and business as against just go from mine to harbour?
I think that there's a lot of initiatives in Africa occurring at the moment in terms of looking at infrastructure projects in the northern countries, coming up the sort of central corridor from South Africa. And if we look at that, it's about going beyond the resources draw on the continent and trying to create an infrastructure that enables people to trade between countries, because intra-Africa trade is probably pretty low. It's probably around about 12% of the GDP of Africa in total. So if you look at that, you know, to allow all the countries to start trading with each other and, you know, sort of going into an agricultural economy to bring food to the world, to bring other finished processed resources to the world is what Africa would need to get to, and that it needs transport infrastructure to do that.
What does your logistics bill look like for the ordinary company? Because I've picked up another stat here that says oftentimes the transportation cost will make up about 53.2% of the entire bill. Is this an accurate reflection? I
think that number is quite high, but for certain commodities you may find that that's true, especially moving into Africa. Taking certain products, building products, etc., you could find logistics is often more expensive than the actual product itself, which is really crazy. But normally if you look in a country like ourselves, in certain food commodities, you're looking at 10 to 12% the logistics spend as a percentage of their total bill. Look at retail stores. The really efficient ones are operating at the 4% level, going up to 8% or so.
I think this throws up an earlier comment that you made about this inability, not only for the rest of the world and maybe even South Africans, to really understand that Africa is 54 different states with 54 different infrastructure challenges. Now, if we take the cue from what you say there, where do you see the opportunities? Which countries do you think are on the cusp of perhaps starting to make the right moves in terms of getting the infrastructure unbundled and put up?
Yeah, it's difficult to say. You know, if one looks at countries like Angola, there's a lot of economic activity. There's huge economic growth in the region. There's still huge infrastructural challenges there. and sort of trying to invite international business into those countries. People are successful there, still have problems. Obviously Southern Africa has to try and work together to stay competitive, so we can still remain as a gateway into sort of at least sub-Saharan Africa, and to move forward. So it's about trying to get the countries to reduce that border clutter, to allow people to move freely. It's about access of information, visibility of information, and as you mentioned, the border controls sort of been made more electronic, and the access to that information is essential.
Let's go there to the customs and the border management in particular. I think it was just last month that Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan was just launching, in his capacity of working with SARS, a digitized system for South Africa. Now, one would think that by now South Africa has a fully digitized customs system, and it seems it's taken us up to 2013 to get that up on board. When you consider the border management across the continent, what do investors shy away from? Where are the biggest risks, and is there scope to improve border management as we try to integrate?
I think there's huge scope, and I think a lot of people have been working a lot on trying to reduce that clutter. You hear of border delays at Beit Bridge of several days, but you get things right on one side of the border and the other country doesn't do the same, so you sit and wait. But it does, notwithstanding that, it still does reduce the border crossing times. But for investors, for transporters, for business people, that delay, it costs you money. It means more stock in the system. It means sort of being unsure of what you need, how long your supply chain needs to be, and continuity of supply is a challenge.
Of course,
Africa needs to cut that down.
Of course, Mike, there's very interesting developments in the South African context, with the president signing in the e-tolls bill finally, or eventually, depending on which way you want to look at it. But this can't be good news for your business. How is this going to change the way you're doing business?
Well, I think one has to look at the roads, and the adverts that e-toll or Sanral are putting out at the moment, that reduces the time. We've had the benefits of the e-tolls now for some time, or for the roads, and I think it's inevitable that there will be tolls on the roads. We have to just make sure that we run our cargoes efficiently, and that we're not running lots of empty trucks, attracting a lot of cost per kilogram. The trucks must be loaded optimally, and the roads must be used optimally as well.
Of course, I understand that Barloworld has a significant stake in Avis, and this is obviously another part of your business that is going to be hit right on by these e-tolls. Do you have an indication at this time how much you're expecting this to cost you?
I really can't, I don't have accurate figures to say what it would cost Avis. And obviously it costs the end consumer at the end of the day, because if you or I rent a car, ultimately we're going to be paying for those e-tolls that we use. It's about them having the systems that can efficiently and effectively bill the end user, and that costs people money. So notwithstanding the costs of the e-toll, there's also the cost of running those systems from the transport service providers, from the courier companies, from all sorts of operators that are using the highways every day.
For a large part of our discussion, Mike, we have focused on road transportation more than any other aspect, but there's been a lot of debate around the transition from road to rail. How significant and how big is this movement? Well,
the movement is still really, there's still a long road to travel, or sort of, excuse the pun, but is that rail is essential to the success of this country, and it's and rail, it's not about it's about reducing cost, and it's also about trying to make sure that the predictability of the operation of rail is very good. And that's the challenges I know that Transnet are working really hard at, to try and improve that predictability, so that if a train is going to take 3 or 4 days to get down to Durban, and that's consistent, it's 3 days, then people can work around it and use it effectively. And it's about getting those cargoes onto rail, getting those trucks off our roads, and working in unison with Transnet and the road operators to move cargoes. Ultimately, I always say it's the first and last mile delivery that needs to be done by road,
Right.
and the rest can be done by rail.
Very quickly, before I let you go, the aviation space, is this, we've seen a flurry of activities, mostly around the entry of low-cost carriers into the South African market. Does this hold any prospects for business and the movement of cargo in particular?
Yeah, there's a significant amount of cargo that moves by air, and we'd love to see a successful low-cost operator survive and with a sustainable business model, and yes, and the opportunities for moving automotive parts, flowers, food, etc. by air, it remains an opportunity for
Mike,
us.
thank you so much for making the time to chat to us today.